In this video, we are going to see how to add a form to our tic-tac-toe. As everything is in a repository, as always, we are going to go from this step to this other step here. They are in two different GitHub branches. So, you can see here at this URL the starting point, and here the finishing point. You can see the code online or download it as a zip. What are the steps that we are going to implement or do? Well, in the first place, in React, we are going to add this input field as a control component. We will add the two methods to modify it, to handle input change and to handle the submit, and of course we will render this input field. Then in Redux, when we submit from React, what we will need is to modify the state, an action to say that something happened in React, and finally a reducer to treat or to control this new part of the state. And finally, when something happens in Redux, React will receive as a prop this player name. And what does React has to include? Well, a new condition that if the player has a name, it will show the game, and if not, it will show the input field. So we have three steps: first React, then Redux, and finally React again. Okay, let's code it. We start with our tic-tac-toe game as is this here. It has routing, it has this continue possibility, and new game starts with an empty board. Perfect. If we go to our game component, what we are going to do here is to add this input field. Remember that we have in the render method these three alternatives depending on the fetch state. So we are not considering fetch but the player name, so we go to this third alternative and we add a condition here that for now it is going to be false because it will depend on what comes from Redux. So let's see, let me move the code. Perfect. Now, this is not going to be rendered. We will change, of course, this condition that when something comes from Redux, because the player name has been modified, we will show the game. And if the player name is not modified, we show this other part of the form. Return, in this case, we return just a header containing the form. So form on submit, let me write it, okay. What do we do when the user submits the form? We call a method, handle player submit, for example, a name that we invent, of course. And inside the form, we include a label. We tell the user introduce player name and the input field. This input field, of course, is type text. It has a value that we will see in a minute. And when the user introduces anything, any letter, any character, we call also another of our methods, handle player input change. Let's see it better. Perfect. And we close the input field. And finally, what the user needs is another input, type submit. And value, what the user reads, in this case, just a string submit. Well, what is the value of this input field? Well, the value is not what the user writes, but what we control in this method, and we will do a set state. So the value comes from this dot state dot, we can call it player name, for example. So now we have our form, but it is not still, it is it isn't working still because we have to add these two methods. Let's add them. For example, here, in fact, you can put it anywhere. Handle player submit. We just console log. We are going to submit this value, and the value is state.value. No, player name. We call it player name. And the second method, handle player input change, it receives an event, of course, and input change. We just add another log with the event. Remember that you need to add the bindings in the constructor. So the two methods will have, as always, well, not always, when they want to use this object like this. And finally, we need the state, because we are using a state. This is one occasion where we have this React state just to control the component. The state includes player name with an initial value, initial state empty. It's just a JavaScript object, very simple, with player name. I think it's everything more or less okay. We've got our form here. The initial value will be empty. When something changes, we call handle player input change, and when we submit, we call handle player submit. Let's try it, but you can see that these two methods are still empty. Now, in the new game, we render a player name, and if we open the console, we can see that something changed, and if we click submit, well, we are still not submitting anything because we are not modifying the state. So let's continue. We are going to modify handle player input change, and here we have to modify the state player name with the value that you saw into the log. So when the user writes into the input, it will come here. We set a new state, and everything is rendered, and the input will have another value here. And what about handle player submit? Well, it in fact receives the event, and what we are going to do for now is just event prevent default. Perfect. Now we are changing the state, and when we submit, we have here the value, and we can do it with it whatever we want. That in fact it will be just a Redux action. Let's go with the Redux part. In Redux, what we will need is to add a new action. We go to the actions file, and we add another action that is very simple. Export function, new player, it receives this player name, it will come of course from React, and it is just a plain JavaScript object as always, with type new player, or new name, or the name that you want to give this action, and player name, player name. Now we have to add a new reducer just to consider this new action, and we will have a new part of the state. In the state we will have player name that will be controlled by player reducer, and we can import player reducer from, also still it doesn't exist, of course, we are going to create it right now. Well, we have now 4 parts of our state, we just increased it, and we import the player reducer, and when something changes in the player name, is the player reducer the one in charge of it. Okay, let's create the player reducer. Let's create the player reducer, just clicking here. The file is player reducer.jsx, and is as always a function called player reducer. The state will be by default empty, and it receives as always an action. Well, it has also as always a switch on the action type, and we have the action name that is called new player. And what do we do when we receive this action, a new player? Well, we just have to return the payload, player name. And by default, as always, if it is an action that we don't control, state, we return what we received. That by default it starts in empty, okay? Well, we have to export, of course, as always, player reducer. You can add it also up here, of course, this export. And we have to consider another case, that is, look here into the game reducer, or in the turn reducer. We have the action, but we also have the fetch state success action. Why? Because when we fetch data, in that data we have the values of the board, we have the turn, look, and in the case of receiving the turn or receiving data, we return it from action.state.turn, and from the values in the game reducer we return, if we fetch data, we return the values, just to modify the state and to react to render what we fetch. So we have to do exactly the same here. Case fetch state success. We are going to return action state player name. But if we want to be sure, for example, if we are modifying our app and we have all the states saved, we can create a ternary operator if we want. If in the fetch data we have the player name, we return it, and if not, we return empty. Okay, just to consider all the cases if we are evolving our app step by step. Okay, we save it, and the Redux part is complete.